Africa does not lack strategic resources or visionary ideas. Yet a persistent paradox remains. Abundant natural wealth consistently fails to translate into durable sovereign power. Critics correctly identify the mechanism behind this failure. They point to systemic corruption, elite capture, and deep institutional fragility that gradually erode even the most sophisticated economic plans. This criticism is historically valid. History provides painful evidence that no economic architecture, no matter how ambitious, can survive if its governing systems remain highly vulnerable to internal sabotage. Sovereignomics confronts this reality directly. Survival requires abandoning our reliance on the goodwill of charismatic leaders. Instead, we must structurally engineer our institutions to actively resist political capture. When you have abundant natural wealth without the anchor of institutional discipline, you are not building a foundation for sovereignty. You are simply creating a magnet for dependency. Early post-colonial leaders clearly recognized the dangers of neo-colonial extraction systems and unequal exchange. But a critical historical gap emerged. Achieving political independence on paper did not mean these nations achieved institutional sovereignty in practice. Newly independent states inherited colonial administrative structures that were strictly designed to extract raw materials, not to foster domestic development. Financial dependence was baked directly into these new nations through heavily structured external debt systems and reliance on foreign currency reserves. Because these inherited bureaucratic systems remained externally oriented, state visions were executed using severely compromised machinery. Flags and political borders offer little protection if the institutions governing national wealth are still wired to serve foreign extraction. Resource-rich economies generate concentrated financial flows. In weak structures, the state transforms into a distribution mechanism, channeling immense revenues into localized patronage. This fuels comprador elites, domestic political classes whose survival relies entirely on preserving these extractive systems rather than reforming them. Foreign actors actively prefer negotiating with these centralized elites. It provides them a highly efficient route to secure resource access and policy concessions without navigating robust democratic friction. This dynamic breeds a psychological condition known as aid mind. Governing leaders internalize the belief that national survival requires external validation, donor assistance, and foreign approval. Governments afflicted by aid mind begin to favor lucrative foreign contracts, easy debt access, and external legitimacy over the rigorous preservation of their own sovereign assets. Internal elite capture and external pressures feed directly into each other, forming a closed, self-reinforcing cycle that easily bypasses fragile democratic safeguards. Corruption in this context is not an individual moral failing. It is a highly rational, structural behavior, perfectly aligned with the system's broken incentives. To dismantle this extractive loop, Sovereignomics replaces personality-based politics with a rigid, rule-based institutional architecture. The legal anchor for this new system is keep wealth law. This is the binding legal principle that actively prevents foundational national assets from being recklessly liquidated, carelessly depleted, or excessively collateralized. It legally restricts political actors from treating national resources as short-term survival funds or private patronage networks to sustain their specific regimes. Enacting these foundational laws requires the core principle of Govstrength. This is the sheer institutional force and administrative capacity necessary to enforce strict rules against intense pushback from powerful domestic and foreign interests. Govstrength guarantees the protection of sovereign wealth survives. Sudden leadership transitions, volatile electoral cycles, and temporary fiscal emergencies. Without binding asset protection laws and the institutional muscle to enforce them, natural wealth inevitably redirects into private networks of power. But legal frameworks carry a fatal flaw. Laws hold no weight if the auditing systems meant to enforce them are easily manipulated by political pressure. Traditional oversight relies heavily on delayed audits and reactive investigations. This lag time allows systemic corruption to flourish under a veil of total opacity. The ultimate countermeasure against this opacity is AI softcraft, the direct embedding of artificial intelligence into the actual foundational architecture of sovereign governance. AI Softcraft replaces those delayed, easily influenced audits with continuous, real-time monitoring of procurement cycles, public spending, and infrastructure contracts. Machine learning algorithms continuously scan these streams, automatically identifying anomalies associated with embezzlement, procurement fraud, and illicit asset transfers the moment they occur. Past post-colonial projects lacked this computational capacity, making financial opacity virtually inevitable. Hardwiring anti-corruption capability directly into the financial structure removes our dependence on the mere hope of honest leadership. Within Sovereignomics, artificial intelligence functions as an active, structural safeguard against hidden institutional sabotage. Even the most advanced artificial intelligence can be rendered ineffective if its findings are controlled and buried by a heavily centralized, compromised bureaucracy. To prevent this, Sovereignomics integrates blockchain systems and decentralized digital ledgers. These decentralized ledgers create immutable, unalterable transaction records that are structurally resistant to domestic political interference. This creates a multi-layered oversight architecture. National institutions, independent sovereign asset authorities, and continental regulators act together as a synchronized, distributed network. By distributing financial data broadly across this grid, we break the tight informational monopolies that historically allowed corrupt elites to operate invisibly. Layering national power with decentralized continental oversight makes it virtually impossible for any single bad actor to capture the entire economic system. Critics are correct in noting that no technology or institutional design can completely eradicate human corruption. While artificial intelligence heavily restricts the opportunities for financial manipulation, long-term structural integrity requires a solid foundation of civic ethics and total judicial independence. Elite capture frequently begins mentally before it ever manifests financially. A true transition requires psychological sovereignty, a civilizational shift where governing classes stop seeking external validation. Technology only strengthens institutions when leaders view their primary role as intergenerational stewards of national wealth, rather than short-term political beneficiaries. The battle for sovereignty is fought squarely within institutions themselves, marrying protected natural wealth with disciplined, technologically enforced systems. This brings us to a stark pragmatic reality. A doctrine that restructures wealth, technology, and continental power cannot be implemented through political enthusiasm alone. Moving too fast without proper safeguards risks severe institutional overload, massive elite resistance, and premature financial collapse. We need a rigorous transition framework capable of protecting existing economic stability while we simultaneously construct these new sovereign systems. This transition must carefully activate sovereign assets to build genuine financial power, carefully avoiding the historical mistakes of debt dependency. With the diagnosis of institutional failure complete, the next critical step is moving from theory to controlled implementation, guided by a precise Sovereignomics transition blueprint.